topic is Lean Method for Building Good APIs for Business and in general for developers. And the method is called APIOps cycles, and I'm really happy to talk about it here because I've had really interesting discussions on the coffee breaks around the subject. So what is it that I do and have done that made me make this method and kind of talk about it and be inspired by it? I did a lot of things around APIs. Not only APIs, but really around APIs. I started my web services journey 20 years ago. I'm still 25, by the way, but 20 years ago in the basement of a government building because we had to build a lot of web services and stuff around forestry and agriculture when Finland went into European Union. So I'm from Finland. And luckily, that started my kind of web services and API journey where the theme is that we hadn't got a clue what we were doing. We were a bunch of students, and we had to make something fast, and nobody knew what to do. Service-oriented architecture hadn't still been born yet, or it was not landed on that side of the Atlantic yet. And then that kind of repeated itself when I went into a SaaS company where in 2009 we were starting to do REST APIs. So my developers came to me one day and said, hey, we are going to have an API. And I was like, okay, yes, and that is what then? So nobody knew how to make good APIs at that time. And we kind of had to implement a research project every time to understand what were the best practices. And luckily things have changed, but still, in this conference now, we're still hearing a lot of pieces of things that we need to do, but how to actually put that all together. And let's see. So some of the material that I'm explaining here, it has a lot of, in the slides, there are a lot of text slides, but most of the stuff is in the book, in the API Economy 101 book, or on the apiopscycles.com site. So just go there or in the blogs and you'll find stuff. So why am I explaining this to you guys? Because I wish that somebody had given a magic API pill to me when we started out. And it was a really rough journey, but we survived. And what I learned is that APIs are more of a science than of an art. A lot of times people look at API design as being some sort of a magic thing where you just kind of come up with some design, or some developers look at it like, okay, I'm just going to round up some crude stuff here and be done with it. And none of that is actually a really good approach. So I'm actually a master of education, not master of computer science, but I ended up coding when I was 8 years old, and I haven't stopped since. But what I did was that I was asked a lot of times after doing retail APIs and these government web services and a lot of other things, that how do we do it? How do we have random companies, developer teams come together and make good APIs when everybody is in a rush and most of the team is under 25-year-old? So I couldn't explain it. I was just okay, well, I'm kind of hands-on. I go with the team there and I'll just kind of make them do the things in the right way. But what I noticed was that all the teams, when they came first, the new team members or new architects, for example, they were thinking that APIs are just another piece of software, just a normal software like anything else. Especially the back-end developers were really looking at APIs as just another piece of back-end software, while I think it's more like a user interface, like a front-end in a way. And I kind of came up with this combination of, hey, to be an expert on any field, you need skills. You need motivation to develop those skills, but you also need a method. And in IT, there had been a lot of methods, good and bad methods, but still methods. And everybody was talking about DevOps and Agile and ITIL and a lot of other acronyms, but there was no good method for APIs. And why is that important? Because if we combine this kind of practical approach, and then research and business domains, we end up with a situation where there's very little research on APIs, like scientific research. And we don't know a lot about what makes APIs good or bad, or why some areas in the world have a lot of APIs and a lot of good APIs, and other parts of the world don't have them. So some researchers made studies about it, and they actually found out that APIs thrive in cultures where user-centered design is dominant. And especially combinations of APIs, combining different APIs to actually make a working service, they thrive in locations where there's a kind of co-location and mindset for marketers and developers to co-create. And in some parts of the world, it seems that that doesn't really happen. And we had a real problem about it in Finland, actually, and in a lot of places in Europe, that didn't happen. And if you notice the map there are blank spaces in the US too. So the only thing that I felt was a problem in API development, really, was the human part of it. Because hey, come on, we are all human. We all make different kinds of decisions. So how do we make a bunch of humans to actually go with the best practices and to combine them into a really good process of repeatable process that we can use to make good APIs? So this cycle, it's a cycle for a reason. I'm going to explain it later. But this is starting from the business model. So there are some canvases, not all invented by me or my team, but basically some business model and value proposition related canvases and some others where you start with, and then you take lean architecture. So in agile projects, of course, you don't ever do architecture properly because you just use user stories or something like that. But you do need some architecture, and you do need to look at non-functional requirements, for example. I'm going to show a little bit of examples about that later, but the idea that there is a minimum viable architecture process that somebody had designed earlier, not really used a lot, but we took it here and we took it into API use, and it's a pretty clear process, self-explaining almost. So then you go ahead and you build APIs the way that you build APIs, whatever your stack is. But then what you need to do is to audit your APIs. And I don't mean audit in the way of security audit, for example, but audit the design, the manageability. Basically, if you use an API management tool, like all the vendors here try to make us use, you run into a lot of problems. I was employed by a API management vendor and a consultancy, and we had a huge problem because all those developers in our customer organizations were making quite random APIs. They were really good developers, but there was no clear standards. And even if they tried to use OpenAPI or something like that, they were coming up with non-validated schema and a lot of other problems that they just were unpublishable, or they looked really bad when they were published through the API management. So there's a lot of stuff that you need to check, and a lot of stuff that you can avoid by a good checklist, especially when you have rookie API developers. Then there are these other steps in the process, and I'm going to explain a bit more about them later. But the first thing is that why do we need an own method, an own process for APIs? Isn't it enough that we have a very good software development process? Well, it isn't really, because the lean part comes out of it. I actually wore this shirt because of the reason. I ordered this shirt from an online store, which should be a very good online store. But actually what happened was that they sewed the sleeves the wrong way up. So basically, the fabric is the wrong way here. And also, they trimmed these sleeves really badly. This is a very shoddy work. And the thing is that this is really easily done when you make a shirt. I've done this when I was making my own shirts. But I mean, if you buy something, you would expect it to be done properly. And if it's not, everybody's wasting their time, wasting their money. It's going to cost a lot of time to handle that, and you have to throw away the shirt or wear it to a conference like I did. But anyway, so the point of lean in any lean management and lean operation is to remove the waste and basically do things the right way all the time and as fast as you can, but still validating the previous step before you go to the next step. And that is the point of this process. So it's not to make things very rigid, but to make them more smooth. And right now, before I go to the next slide, I just have to say that a lot of architects, a lot of lead developers tell me that, hey, this is not a problem. Of course, everybody knows what to do. I mean, our guys and girls are not stupid. How can people just, do things badly, or what do you mean? And the problem is that they always refer to common sense. Hey, we have common sense. We know how to do this. In Finnish, we called common sense maalaisjärki. I want you all to say maalaisjärki with me. Okay, try it, yes. Maalaisjärki, yes. And the problem is that translates into village sense. So the problem here is that we all come from different villages. And so we have all a bit different thinking of common sense. And with APIs, this looks like the fact that, for example, here, when I came to Austin, I was very confused because everybody kept saying to me, like, hi, how are you doing? Even the guy who was doing the mic and everything was saying to me just now, hi, how are you doing? And I'm like really confused. I don't have the protocol for request and response there because in Finland, we go like, moi, and then the other person says moi, or just stares at you. And that is what I mean. So everybody is really coming from a different village, and in Finland we really do know that. I mean, if you look at that, the response is different based on different locations. So then we come to the next problem, which is that we all copy-paste a lot of stuff from a lot of APIs. And one day I went into the bedroom and I found my husband doing some weird stuff. Not that stuff, but he was doing the post-add and post-del APIs. And I was like, what the you are doing here? And he's a network guy. I'm the software girl in the family. And he was learning to do APIs because he had found out that AWS is really cool. And there's a really cool thing about networking and stuff, so he wanted to learn that. And he went and copied the first API that he just found and didn't even realize that it was really bad. Well, that would be okay because his stuff wasn't going to production at that time, at least. But everything else that you see on this slide is actual stuff from actual really, really big organizations' APIs. My favorite is the one in the bottom, which is that in Finland, we had elections. We have elections every couple of years. And one organization that is really crucial with elections couldn't add new API users to their APIs while there was an election, because that would have meant that they actually restart their servers. Because the guys there had put the API keys into a conf file on the servers, which is like, why? But anyway, the point is, if we don't build the APIs with the right methods, we end up like this. And from project point of view, we end up in this situation. This is from real project, by the way, and not even one project. So there were these 3 client applications, and After 5 months of a 6-month project, they understood that, hey, we didn't ask, and nobody was telling us that what kind of post or get or XML, JSON, or anything else were they actually able to use. So at the final step of the project, they actually found out that no, these consumers cannot use this API. While when you go with this method, you actually start from prototyping and you do the spec, and you don't forget to do that. You do API consumer interviews. There's even a template for that. And then you have more leeway in your project. The one problem is that a lot of APIs get built without a good business idea, good value proposition, why they are getting built. So some guy or girl, either the business management or IT management gets this idea that let's build APIs, and then some random stuff happens. And then you end up with really interesting APIs. Let's talk more about that in the break. But anyway, the idea is that some people have an integration idea of APIs. Other people have some other ideas of APIs. Sometimes very weird APIs get born, and I just want to say that there are a lot of good value propositions to make an API, and then some bad. And if you don't figure out your value proposition, if you don't apply product management practices to when you do APIs, then you are in this situation, which is actually really common with our customers. We do a lot of developer experience reviews and kind of market reviews for APIs, and a lot of times a product manager comes to us and says, I have no idea what our salespeople or our customers should talk about when using this API. And this is why also because you need to figure out what kind of API you're going to do, and you don't want to end up like this. You have to actually figure out from the beginning how are you going to make your API, otherwise this is a question that your boss will ask and you don't have a good answer for that. The method was basically done because API actually stands for, if you didn't know, all people are important. So you have, or you should have, a lot of different practices and people from different places of the organization doing the API design. And most often you don't, because you don't have a common language. And you also need to figure out that the APIs need twice the DevOps that a normal software, because you have the interface and you have the implementation layer. And these are all very confusing concepts, and that's why we have put them together in a meaningful way in this method. And I don't go into details, but the method was born in 2017, and we revised it in end of 2018, and it is Creative Commons licensed, so you can actually freely use it. And the method, now I'm going to the method slides. So it starts from the idea that you have a customer journey and you build the APIs there, or you have jobs to be done and you start building the APIs there. So you have the value proposition canvas, which is a remake of Osterwalder's value proposition canvas, and you start by finding the product market fit for your API, even if it's an internal one. And then you start doing the API business model canvas, and then you go through prototyping, building just enough, and scaling, and every time you use the API audit checklist, and there's even a design guide in the method. So this is all only a part of it. And you have these non-functional requirements that are actually making or breaking your API. So these are the ones that you need to actually really look into, because it's easy to change or add more data, for example, for the API, or more endpoints. But if you get these wrong, you are in a trouble. And everybody hates them, and you still need to do them. So we made them like coloring book pages, because actually you need to talk with the business to do them. And that's really hard for a lot of developers and architects because it actually involves human interaction. So just going through this, so we have some partners with the method. You are free to join, you are free to use it. Please let us know if you want to use it. And we offer also training. And one of the pieces of training is this APIeconomy.info that was built with Tampere University. And it actually has 1 credit left. And this is the last slide because I'm shown the stop sign. So get in contact and start using it. And please tweet and tell your friends. Thank you.